So our next presentation is going to be by Katherine Canniff from Boston College. And her presentation is entitled Learners to Readers to Good Earthly Citizens, Linking Ecological Consciousness to Narrative Approaches and Recent Climate Reporting. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Thanks, DL. I'll just share my screen. Okay. There it is. Yeah, thank you, DL. Just a quick introduction for me. My name's Kate. I'm a senior at Boston College studying applied psychology in the Lynch School. And so this semester, I've been doing a independent study that took me to learn about these processes, these topics, and what I'll be presenting to you today. So I'll be speaking about the concept of ecological consciousness and its incorporation into the field of education. So it does kind of get at like developmental perspectives, like that last question I was asking about. So I hope to provide some insight there. And I'll also be sharing how I kind of see it linked to the current field of journalism and like people's news consumption. So just some objectives for the presentation. I hope that you'll get to learn about some scholarship on the topic and approaches like the concept of ecological consciousness and the influence that narrative can have on personal environmental awareness. And then also just trying to connect the topics by showing how people can kind of use this perspective to synthesize all the climate news that we come across today. So to start off, an overview of the concept. Ecological consciousness is defined as kind of manifesting itself in various attitudes. So one would be an attitude toward or a relationship with nature. And then going from there, there's your relationship with global environmental problems, and then our attitudes towards social and moral responsibility in regards to our actions and inaction towards nature and the environment. So as I was learning about this, it's kind of important to note that obviously you can't, this is something learned over time, and it's a gradual process for students and children to be introduced towards their own relationship with nature, and then from there learn about kind of the global scope of everything. And it's also different attitudes would be most potent when you're interacting in different environments or with different materials. So just thinking about how EC, so I'll call it EC from now on because ecological consciousness is a mouthful, can be kind of activated in different settings. And other scholars kind of separate it into this three-part structure of attitudes. You have the ego attitude, which is your concern for yourself, and then altruism and a biosphere attitude. So it's kind of pulling these together and how you see yourself in relation to the good of others and the good of the earth. And then just two kind of important things to note in terms of limitations. A lot of the research on EC has been conducted on youth audiences and not expanded to kind of adulthood. And then I think it's also important to consider how settings and also socioeconomic status and like privilege are also going to impact how someone experiences EC and how it's measured. So some examples like the countries where information about a government's environmental development or conservation efforts are shared or not shared with the public, that could influence how someone, what kind of news they can consume and how they understand like what their home is doing about climate change versus living in a place that is severely impacted by climate change, and then being in like the context of developed European countries and Western perspectives. These are all things that would affect someone's ecological consciousness. And then one influential text on the topic is this book, Developing Ecological Consciousness, Becoming Fully Human by Christopher Ewell. And he really relies on the power of story to kind of tell the history of the earth. And then he asks the reader to think about their life in this larger context. And he encourages people to kind of move away from pervasive separation consciousness, which he defines as this, how there's so many systems in this world that we kind of see ourselves in competition with instead of like in union with or reliant on. So he adds prompts and reflection questions throughout the whole book, asking people to think about their own life story in the context of all of Earth's life story. So this is just a quote that I liked from the book. So he says, this shift in perception could open the possibility for a new story, one centered in the question, what can we do for each other? So he's kind of just asking us to kind of get more of a bigger perspective on things. And then he also, just kind of going back to the idea of story, he pulls from the author Byron Katie a lot in the book. And she's also just trying to get her readers to think about how they should see their story in the context of global problems. So that's a quote there from her. And he's just asking his readers to leave behind these stories of separation economism that he says kind of dominate a lot of our world today, and reminds people to pause and recognize their own morals and beliefs and how they fit into their life stories. And then kind of shifting from there, I also looked into how EC is being used in the field of education today. And there's a new field of eco-pedagogy, which is a place-based experiential and environmental education approach. And it's meant to examine the connections between environmental violence and social violence, which, kind of going back to that original definition of EC, it's connecting like the personal and global issues and getting people to think about moral responsibilities. And it's also encouraging people to become more literate on environmental issues and understand the earth from like a diverse range of knowledge. And then just a brief overview of some studies that I found on the topic. There's some scholars who have done research on geo-coaching, which is meant to give young students direct interactions with nature. So they conducted this study at a camp over the summer where the kids were doing like bug hunting and like playing in a pond. And then afterwards, the researchers would give them interviews and do qualitative work to analyze their expressions of joy, awe, wonder, discomfort, and loneliness, and kind of using that to see how these habits that students can have in nature can also have social potency and kind of encourage this sense of environmental awareness. And then another study that I found compared urban kindergarten students and kindergarten students in rural areas and measured their levels of cognitive ecological awareness. And they found that students in rural areas were more likely to have signs of this. So I think it just shows that there's also a need to make sure that this kind of EC can be developed in like school settings in cities and in rural areas. In all different schools. And they also noted that their awareness was kind of rooted in an aesthetic sense of nature's beauty. So it also shows that there's this need for a gradual process of introducing students to like the global issues and really guiding them through moving from like a personal appreciation of beauty to a more critical approach. And then just to briefly talk about programs for adult education, there was this one study done where a program held a series of workshops that helped adults think about the amount of waste that they could create, and they would have people bring in waste and talk about like how different items should be properly disposed of. And they also visited landfills. So there it is being introduced into these concepts too, which is great contexts. And then to kind of shifting gears again to look at the impact of narrative approaches. So this is also related to the field of education. Critical autoethnographic narrative is a long-term, but it's talking about how a program where teachers are asked to regularly journal and reflect on their own life story and how they see it relating to the work that they're doing. So it's a way of drawing connections between personal life story and broader and social and cultural structures. So it's definitely relevant to teachers wanting to implement more environmental education or even geo-coaching in their classrooms. And just kind of going back to the power of story, it's also showing us how this can really shape how people are, oops, sorry, I just saw it. I'm running out of time. How people are kind of using this in the classroom. And then this is the kind of book that made me interested in this topic and start researching it. I was rereading Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and this book kind of just goes to show that the kind of narrative approach of introducing these serious global issues to people can really have an impact. And it was published in 1962, but it's still a cultural phenomenon. So that's just another example of the importance of narrative here. And this is one quote from a scholar on on Carson. Her intention was to achieve this by transforming localized private feelings into a collective public voice and employ this in making the case for change. And then just to move on to current journalism, there's the UN released kind of a guidelines to journalists and how they can be having a positive impact on the ways to address the climate crisis. And they were talking about how needs to go just beyond the disasters in the climate and also focused on the human impact of everything. And there is a growing field of solutions journalism, they call it, where people are covering how communities are being innovative and adapting to changing conditions. So I kind of covered a range of topics here, so I'm just going to try and tie it all together real quickly. So I kind of, from looking at these different areas of research, have seen how news reporting as can be a daily means of activating a sense of ecological consciousness and a way to connect personal stories to stories that we read about the environment. And as you know, students are getting older and becoming more aware global citizens. There's going to be a need to introduce them to synthesizing these concepts and like being able to consume all this information. So eco-pedagogy and environmental education can inform how parents and instructors are teaching students to digest all this reporting. And so taking inspiration from Yule, I kind of came up with some reflection questions, which he has throughout his book that you can ask yourself when you're reading news stories, and something that this research has definitely made me think more critically when I'm reading the news. So just one question is like, can I imagine what this changed landscape looks like? What would it feel like to live in a place changing like this? So just to sum up here, I just hope that kind of bringing these different ideas and areas of research together can help us build this new lens of how to digest everything that we're seeing happening in the world, and then also help guide students and just other people in our lives toward more of an environmental, ecological orientation. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Kate, for providing that overview about I think a lot of different ideas and theories and work that is being done in this space around advocacy and thinking about especially development and early education about environmental awareness. We did go a little bit over on time, so we have just like 1 or 2 minutes for questions. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask Kate?
Hi, that was great. That was my response, my question in the previous presentation. You started from the education and the relationship between education and art, storytelling, narrative. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Cecilia, were you about to ask a question?
Yeah. So yeah, I think like this research is awesome, and I was just like curious about like what's your most surprising finding from your research?
I guess I was really interested in like communication studies and the like scholarly work that's being done in journalism. So one of the studies that I briefly mentioned but didn't go into was they interviewed a bunch of reporters that were going to COP conferences, and I think it was their sample was from 3 different COP conferences over the years, and they found that reporters who were just kind of reporting what was happening at these events were just staying within their country's kind of cohort, and were talking to sources only from their country and not really gathering that diverse range of knowledge. But some writers who were providing more of a commentary on the of the events there were kind of in touch with more people from different countries. So I think that really surprised me, and just goes to show that there needs to be more of an effort in making sure that even if a source can't make it in the story, that people like reporters still need to be talking to people who are to different stakeholders in the issue. So that was just one study that I thought was really interesting, and showing how the field of journalism is also needing to adjust and improve as it goes along.
Thank you so much, Kate. Let's give Kate a big round of virtual applause. And like always, I encourage you to leave feedback in the feedback form, or reach out to Kate using her contact information in the conference schedule.